Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Your Notre Dame live stream will begin soon. Thanks for watching. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out, for braving the Friday afternoon football energy. It's exciting, of course, to have this talented and fantastic panel here to discuss listening to Puerto Rico. We also have this event live streamed, so we have some learners around the world who are watching this live, and I'm really excited to have that audience here as well. So hi, everybody out there. So it's my pleasure to introduce our event today, and then we'll get right to the main event. So we have, as some of you may know, we with our friends at the University of Michigan, we're really pleased to collaborate on what's called a teach-in, which is teach-out, which is a very, very, very small online micro course. That is to say, an event that is issue-driven, that is designed to activate public engagement and to convene a campus, let me put it this way, to convene a community around issues that matter. And so for our collaboration with the University of Michigan, the topic that we focused on was Puerto Rico. And in particular, we wanted to make sure that instead of projecting expertise out into the world, as one often does with an online course, we felt it was appropriate and in fact urgent that first we went and listened. So in order to do that work, Tom and Marisel, who we'll introduce in a moment, went to Puerto Rico about 3 weeks after we hatched this idea, went to Puerto Rico with Built on Ruma and Sonia Howell from the ODL, and started collecting stories and gathering video and film testimonies to simply listen, and that we would then bring back to share with the world. And a team from the University of Michigan did the same. So all of this emerged fairly rapidly, and I want to say, first of all, publicly, thank you to the team that did all of this incredible work, most notably Tom Anderson, Marisel Moreno, Bill Donnarumma, and Sonia Howell. So if you guys can show yourself, these two in particular. Thank you very much. And the only thing I would say is that this event is part of a series that we will be excited to tell you a little bit more about in the future. So without any more preamble, what I'd like to do is to turn it over to Tom Anderson, who is going to moderate the discussion, the roundtable that will be coming. And so let me just tell you a little bit about Tom. Tom is the Dr. Williams Scholl Professor of Latin American Literature and Chair of our Department of Romance Languages and Literatures here at Notre Dame. He's a specialist in the history and culture of the Hispanic Caribbean. And he's offered classes, lectured, and published in many of the leading academic journals in his field on a variety of topics related to the region. An expert on the literature and culture of modern Cuba specifically, Tom is the author of Everything in Its Place, the Life and Works of Virgilio Piñera, Carnival and National Identity and the Poetry of Afro-Cubanismo, and, I'm sorry, I can't quite see, make the note, Piñera Corresponsal en Vida and Cartas, with his wife, Marisel Moreno. Professor Anderson co-authored Art at the Service of the People, Posters and Books from Puerto Rico's Division of Community Education, and has co-curated, along with Dr. Moreno, several exhibits of their private collection of Divedco posters and books, including one that is presently on display through April 2019 at the National Museum of Puerto Rican Arts and Culture in Chicago. Tom Anderson is presently working on his fourth book project that focuses on images of the U.S. civil rights movement in Cuban poetry. So Tom is going to moderate our discussion today, and Tom, please come to the podium.
Thank you, Elliot, and thank you all for coming and joining us in this Listening to Puerto Rico event. I'm just going to introduce briefly the 6 panelists here, and then we're going to get in right away to a series of questions that I'm going to ask all of them related to Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico and the impact it's had on the island. And I'm going to introduce the panelists alphabetically, and I'm going to start with Dr. Yamil Colon. He is the Melchor Visiting Assistant Professor in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering. Dr. Colon was born and raised in Bayamón, Puerto Rico. He received his Bachelor of Science from the University of Notre Dame in 2009 and his PhD in Chemical Engineering from Northwestern University in 2015. After graduating from Northwestern, he joined the University of Chicago and the Argonne National Laboratory, where he worked as a postdoctoral researcher until July 2018. Yamil was also a Fulbright Scholar in 2009-2010 and a fellow of the Council on the Future of Advanced Materials of the World Economic Forum from 2016 to 2018. His research interests involve the computational design and discovery of materials for energy-related application. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Nydia Morales-Soto. She was born and raised in Puerto Rico. She received her bachelor's degree in microbiology from the University of Puerto Rico, Humacao, and her PhD in microbiology and molecular biology from the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. In 2011, she started a postdoctoral position in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering and Earth Sciences, and she transitioned to a senior research scientist position in 2016. Her most recent scientific work exploring how bacteria communicate in response to antibiotics has received the Journal of Biological Chemistry's Editor's Pick distinction and was highlighted by several news outlets, including The Telegraph in the UK. Nydia advises, mentors, and trains undergraduate and graduate students across disciplines and is actively involved with campus groups that support the advancement and professional development of women and minorities. Next, I'd like to present Dr. Marisel Moreno, my wife. She's the Reverend John A. O'Brien Associate Professor of Latino Literature in the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures. She's the recipient of the American Association of University Women Fellowship and is the author of Family Matters, Puerto Rican Women Authors on the Island and the Mainland, University of Virginia Press, 2012. In 2011, she received the Indiana Governor's Award for Service Learning, and in 2016, she received the Sheedy Excellence in Teaching Award from the University of Notre Dame's College of Arts and Letters. Professor Moreno's teaching and research interests include Latina Caribbean authors, as well as Afro-Latino, Latina, U.S. and U.S. Central American cultural production. Her articles have been published in Hispanic Review, Latino Studies, Studies in American Fiction, Afro-Hispanic Review, Centro, the Latino Research Review, Melis, Hispanic Journal, among others. Professor Moreno is currently working on her second book project, which is provisionally titled Bordering the Archipelago, Undocumented Migration in the Cultural Production of the Hispanic Caribbean and its Diaspora. Next, I'd like to present Joyce Rivera Gonzalez. She's currently a PhD student in the Department of Anthropology at Notre Dame. She was born and raised in Utuado, Puerto Rico, and she holds a degree in integrative biology from the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras. Currently, her ethnographic work centers on working class communities in San Juan, Puerto Rico. She is interested in how residents of these communities understand and conceptualize disaster and vulnerability, especially in the wake of Hurricane Maria. At Notre Dame, she is part of the GLOBES program for Environment and Society and the 2017-18 Social Responsibilities for Researchers program. She's also affiliated with the Institute for Latino Studies and the Helen Kellogg Institute of International Studies. Joyce has participated in a variety of leadership positions on campus, including the Latinx Graduate Association at Notre Dame and as anthropology representative in the Graduate Student Union. Ultimately, she is interested in applying anthropological and ethnographic perspectives to popular understandings of natural disasters. Next, Dr. Felipe Santiago is a recently appointed assistant professor in the Department of Biological Sciences. He has spent the last 14 years in the United States training and working in the field of cell biology of disease. He was born and raised in Puerto Rico, where he obtained his BS degree in industrial biotechnology from the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagüez. As an undergraduate, he won many research awards, including the fellowship from the Department of Defense to work for a semester in the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory in Washington. There, his mentor encouraged him to apply to graduate school at Cornell University, where he joined the laboratory of Tony Brescher, a famous cell biologist, and received his PhD in molecular and cellular biology. At Cornell, he became interested in the field of host pathogen interactions and wanted to apply his cell biological knowledge to infectious diseases. That brought him to the laboratory of Tamara Doring at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, where his favorite research bug became the fungal pathogen Cryptococcus neoformans. Did I say that right? An environmental yeast that causes fatal meningitis. Now that he has established his lab here at Notre Dame, he plans to continue his studies to elucidate how this fungus causes disease and to find ways to manipulate the outcome of infection for the benefit of the patient. And last but not least, I'd like to present Dr. Harold Toro. He currently teaches comparative social inequality at the Keough School of Global Affairs. His research and teaching focus on social inequality and stratification, labor markets, and economic development. Within these broad areas, his research questions are motivated by an interest in disentangling individual attributes of labor force participants from the institutional processes that impinge on their labor force behavior. Geographically, his work to date has focused on examining these processes in Mexico, Puerto Rico, and the United States. He earned his PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, and spent 1 year as a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard's Weatherhead Center for International Affairs. Between 2008 and 12, he worked as Director of Research for the Center for the New Economy, a think tank focusing on economic and social policy in Puerto Rico. He began his academic career in 2013 as an assistant professor of sociology at the University of New Mexico, where he was also a senior fellow at the Robert Wood Johnson Center for Health Policy. Please join me in welcoming all of our panelists. So now we're going to get right to the program, which is just to ask our panelists a series of questions that are related to their experiences before and after Hurricane Maria. And, you know, this was a rather long-winded introduction, and I'm going to ask the panelists to keep their answers brief. The panelists aren't necessarily going to answer all of the questions, but depending on their expertise, they may answer some and not others. But I do want each of the panelists to answer perhaps just, oh, are we going to show the video, Elliot? I'm sorry, we were supposed to start with the promo video, so I got ahead of myself here.
We have the super sweet. I think it's just...
On September 20th, 2017, Hurricane Maria ravaged the island of Puerto Rico.
In an effort to learn from those affected by the storm, the University of Notre Dame and the University of Michigan are collaborating on the Listening to Puerto Rico Teach Out.
In June of 2018, our universities went to Puerto Rico to talk to people across all walks of life, to hear in their own words how their communities have banded together in the wake of the storm.
In response to these stories, we're challenging our university communities to join this online learning event and connect with organizations on the ground to help the many people still on the road to recovery.
Michigan's public mission calls for our university to advance human understanding and contribute to a better society.
And Notre Dame's distinctive mission calls us to be a force for good in the world and respond to the demands of justice.
Together, we will examine the challenges of infrastructure, policy, culture, and economics,
and what each of us can do to help Puerto Rico's continued recovery.
Please join us in this unique learning opportunity.
Estábamos rodeados de agua.
Sí, parecía un desierto. Nosotros, esto aquí es bien húmedo y parecía que le hubiesen pegado un fósforo. O sea, no había una hoja.
La que ya emocionalmente el país estaba en pedazos. Entonces llega esto que de verdad destruye el país.
Y ahí vimos el sufrimiento, el dolor, la pobreza que hay en este país. María sacó para afuera la desigualdad que hay en Puerto Rico.
But people want to be heard. They want to talk, they want to share what they've learned, and they want to share their hope for a better future for Puerto Rico.
Fue la sociedad civil, aquí y afuera, en nuestra diáspora extendida, con todos nuestros aliados que ustedes movilizaron y que acá se movilizó también, la que salvó este país y la que lo sigue salvando. O sea, no se puede hacer nada sin la diáspora. Nada.
Aquí lo que hace falta son recursos para completar lo que ya empezamos, porque desde el día 1 hemos estado trabajando.
Es una de las cosas que más me preocupa. Yo estoy loco por arrancar de nuevo el vivero para darle empleo a la gente del barrio.
Today, a very powerful day. I think it was really impressive once again how they're just in all the loss and the misery and the suffering. There's a lot of positive messages.
Casa Pueblo pues estamos desarrollando una insurrección energética.
Hay que cambiar el cuento, hay que tratar de narrar, sí, la marginación sostenida, pero también el valor sostenido del país y lo que nosotros podemos dar al mundo y lo que es rentable para ser autosustentables y tomar las riendas de este nuevo país en las manos nuestras.
En Puerto Rico, desde el 21 de septiembre, a pocas horas de que pasara el huracán María, se vio de manera contundente cómo fueron las mismas comunidades las que trabajaron por ellas mismas para literalmente sobrevivir.
Listening to Puerto Rico is learning about the past and the present and solving the future.
Thank you. So yeah, we're just going to go ahead with some questions. And one thing I wanted to mention before I go any further is that if you do want to sign up for the course, it's a free course. It's listeningtopuertorico.org. And you know, the basis of the course are the interviews that we did in Puerto Rico, Marisel and myself, but also some of the faculty members from the University of Michigan. There's about 25 hours of video recordings on the site, but people to do the course, you don't have to watch or listen to everything. You kind of pick and choose what you want to go through. And if you want any additional information about the course afterwards, we could talk about that. But as I was saying before, I'm going to ask a series of questions to the panelists, all of whom are from Puerto Rico, all faculty, one graduate student at the University of Notre Dame. And while everybody doesn't have to answer every question, I do want all the panelists to respond to the first question. And bearing in mind that all of you could probably talk about this particular question for hours, you know, I want to ask the panelists just in 1 or 2 minutes to respond. First of all, to describe your experiences with Hurricane Maria, and how did it affect you personally and those close to you and the communities in which you were born or where you lived on the island. And we can just start, Joyce, with you, and we'll just go across the panel.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. It's truly an honor. And thank you for taking the time out of the fun and games and the hecticness of outside to be here. I think everyone here appreciates it. So just talking, we can talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I'm from Utuado, Puerto Rico. This municipality is right in the center of Puerto Rico, around 1 hour and a half away, 1 hour and 30 minutes away from the capital. And because of this isolation, I think that it was one of the municipalities that was very much impacted. I was here in Notre Dame. Life kept going on and on. When you're a grad student or when you're a faculty, life continues, right? And it was very, I think, difficult, kind of juxtaposing those two things. The fact that here life went on as usual, but then I also didn't know anything about my family, and I did not know for at least 7 days. So that was at least my experience being here. Eventually, when I did find out, at least my family and friends had been relatively okay, but I do know and I have to recognize that that was not the experience of a lot of people. And I think when we talk about what a disaster means, we also have to talk about how disaster doesn't mean the same thing for everyone. And this can be experienced differently according to social class, and it can be experienced differently according to different, I would say, inequalities that are in the island and elsewhere, right? So at least in terms of my family and friends, they were disconnected from, from the surrounding world easily for a month completely. And in terms of getting the power and the electricity back on, they eventually ended up getting that service in March, so approximately 6 months or so after the event. And I think, right, there's the fact that it was very isolated, and there are still areas in Utuado and Yabucoa, which was the first municipality that actually experienced the brunt of a hurricane, that are still without electricity up to this day. At least where my grandpa used to live, there's still no electricity. So I think, and just kind of to wrap it up, and we'll talk a little bit more about these things later, but I do think that that's one of the benefits and one of the great things of doing events such as these, because like we saw in the promo video, we do have to change the narrative, and we have to start thinking about disasters and what happened in a different way. So yeah, I'll go on and on, so I'll pass the
Thank you, Nydia. Thank you, Joyce.
I want to thank you as well for being here, and this is an honor, so thank you for the invitation. For me, I came here to the U.S. 14 years ago from Puerto Rico to do my PhD, and my husband came with me. All of our family was still back in Puerto Rico, our direct family, so it's very different experiences as well, because you can't really, describe them all the same way. I had contact with most of my direct family members myself, but they couldn't talk to one another because I could talk to them in different ways, but some of them have a landline, some of them had internet, some of them had wireless, so they couldn't really get in touch with one another. So we joked about Command Central in Indiana. That was my job, keeping everybody, and as you said, right, like life here was just the same, but you're still trying to kind of help back at home as much as you can. And my mom was recovering from a bone marrow transplant, so we had to kind of deal with that as well, and so there were a lot of like different situations health-wise, trying to plan trips, how to move her away so that she can have what she needs while things recover. So I'm happy to talk more about that later.
Excellent, thank you. Harold.
Sure. So I was here, like my fellow panelists, and people forget that before Maria there had been a prior hurricane, and I remember jokingly mentioning to some family, order the desalinization pill so that when the second one comes around, you have a way of having drinkable water. That was a joke at the time. It turned into something not quite so funny when Maria actually went through and essentially destroyed the island. I have several family members who have since moved to the U.S. as a result of the hurricane. And as I'm sure is true for many Puerto Ricans. The primary sort of immediate factor that determines that is what happens to the fabric of your daily life. My mother, for example, is in her 70s. Without communication, the typical network of friends that she would rely on for doing things, connecting with, etc., is simply disrupted. And the siblings of mine that are in Puerto Rico and other family members are simply not enough to help folks, especially the elderly, put their lives back together in some orderly manner. And that is partly what triggers migration and what at the time seemed basically turned the airport into a refugee center, and basically people trying to escape the island. The issue of not having any water. People have water tanks in their backyards. The hurricane was so severe that many of these simply became non-functional tools, even though people had some degree of preparation, and that was true for many folks. Some folks talk about environmental refugees. One could argue that many of the Puerto Rican families that have left fit the bill, fit the category. But I raise this issue of what happens to the fabric of daily life to So to make the point that even though you may move with residents to Florida or Virginia or New York or what have you, those are not things you can repair or reconstitute in some easy manner. And that is, I think, the part that, I mean, certainly for my family has been the hardest one to deal with.
Thank you, Harold. Felipe?
Yeah, so likewise, I was here in the mainland. I was in St. Louis when Maria crossed Puerto Rico. And I do remember that morning I was texting my parents, and everything was fine. And you know, being an eternal optimism, I lived through Hugo and George, and you know, Puerto Rico was able to move on. So I never once crossed my mind that something like this was going to happen on the island. And then when it did happen, I remember I was just texting my parents, and then all of a sudden the text stops, and then I tried to call on them. Calls don't go through. No broadcast, the TVs, there's no radio, all of a sudden. And it was something, it's very funny at the time that phrase didn't exist, but then at the time, the term fake news really, I remember, like, came true, because I remember looking through the social media, reading that my town was completely covered by a landslide, and like fearing that might be true, that all my parents might just be under the soil. So that uncertainty, you know, went on for 7 days. So I think that basically affect you in any way, even though you're going through your normal life here, but having that uncertainty all the time here, it really affect you. And thankfully, I mean, none of my family had any material damages, and they were lucky in the sense that they were only 3 months without power. But it definitely, you know, it takes a toll psychologically, like not having any news and then living under that uncertainty all the time, and you're trying to look for something and finding all these fake news. It was very hard.
Thank you, Felipe. Marisel?
I agree with that. I think one of the hardest things for me personally was knowing the magnitude of what had happened, not being able to have communication, and then trying to carry on as if not, you know, just with daily life. Because I remember, and I have one of my students here, I had to go teach the next day, you know, and she was in my class. And I just remember feeling, I just wanted to break down. I just wanted to cry. I didn't feel like I could be in front of a classroom teaching, knowing that there was so much suffering going on and I couldn't reach my family. I distinctly recall having one conversation with my mom, who got a hold of me, I don't know how. The hurricane was going on, and she was just saying how terrified she was. They were in a hallway, which was kind of the interior of the house, just kind of sitting there, she and my sister, and it felt, the way she described it, it felt to them like there was a jet just stationed right on top of the house. Like everything was shaking, and this was going on for hours without stopping. So just that sense of impotence, like you cannot really do much, and having to kind of go on with daily life, to me personally was really difficult. I also did not have contact with a lot of my family. Most of them didn't hear from them for a long time, and I was especially worried about my grandfather, who at the time was 95, an aunt who has had Wilson-Barrett disease for many years, and she was in delicate condition, and an uncle who was in a delicate condition because he has had a lot of health issues, and the main one was diabetes, and I knew he had to get his dialysis. The three of them have passed away since. It didn't happen immediately after the hurricane, but it happened a few months after that. So it's definitely touched my family very closely, and they're still grappling with all of the effects and the psychological toll that it takes on everyone.
Thank you, Marisel. Yamil?
So I was also here in the main line. I was in Chicago. I remember the day of the hurricane, I spoke with my mom, just like, don't worry about it, we're gonna be fine, we've been through others, this will be nothing different. Obviously that was wrong. About 2 days after the hurricane, you start seeing social media and you see these videos of rivers passing through people's houses, right? You see the hurricane just lifting houses or mudslides going down to the river, and it's just, the panic is unbearable. It wasn't until about 5 days after the hurricane, I got a text from my mom, we're okay. It's like, okay, fine. About 3 days after that, I was able to finally talk to them. They described, look, we're on a highway right now, there's a lot of cars here, this is the only place we can get cell reception, so we have to keep this quick. It's like, we're okay, your dad and I, we're okay. There was damage to the house. Essentially, we have a second unit on top of our house. It lost the roof completely. A lot of material damage, furniture gone, stove gone, washer, dryers, refrigerators completely destroyed. And then there was accumulated water that then started seeping down. So there's also damage to the main living unit. And until this day, those haven't been fixed, so that they're still dealing with that. But thankfully, they were okay. But I think the uncertainty of knowing what had happened and what didn't it takes a toll on you. And then my best friend, he was in Puerto Rico when this happened, and he described to me how my father just broke down when he saw the damage. Right, and then so it's very difficult as the son, as in the Latino culture, right? You're the man of the house, sort of thing, right? Updated, whatever, it doesn't matter. In culturally speaking, that's very difficult to know that your family went through those difficult times and you weren't able to be there. And then so immediately after I heard from my mom, it's like, Mom, should I go? I want to go help. Can I go help? She's like, no, stay where you are, right? There's nothing you can do here. All you're going to become is another mouth to feed. We need the resources, we need the food, we need the water. Stay where you are. We're fine. We're going to be fine. So that was.
Thank you to all the panelists. And I think it's really apparent after all of these testimonials, even people who aren't on the island, the psychological toll has been so strong, and the needs still continue. And I feel, as the husband of a Puerto Rican woman, my own family, very intimately attached to the island too, this sense of kind of helplessness. And what Yamil was saying, this feeling like, you want to go, and so many of you probably have the same issue, right? That you want to return as quickly as you can, but at the same time, it was so complicated to return, and more feet on the ground, and more people to feed, and more people to look for water, electricity, really complicated matters. And so just to follow up, and you can kind of, answer as you see fit. Not everybody may want to answer this question, but, maybe from the perspective of your respective fields, perhaps, to speak briefly about, one of the most pressing needs in Puerto Rico right now, as you see it. I mean, because obviously, almost a year later, it'd be a huge exaggeration to say that the island's back on its feet, and it's not even close to a full recovery. So I don't know if anybody wants to volunteer the first answer, but what are the most pressing needs right now?
So I can go ahead. So from my perspective, right, so I'm a chemical engineer. I work with energy-related things, sustainable energy, and so on. Even though I just work on computers doing simulations. But what really speaks to me, though, is this was the longest and the largest blackout in U.S. history, right? So it really speaks to the state of the infrastructure of Puerto Rico, of the energy grid. And then the consequences that had for people who needed medical services, for people who needed their dialysis machine in their house and they couldn't get the power. How do we then, move forward and from a sustainability point of view, from an energy point of view, such that, this doesn't happen again, right? The progress has been such that, we're almost at 100% in terms of energy, but even until February, still essentially 500,000 people were still without power, right? That's crazy. How does that happen? Why does that happen? And so that's really what I, from my perspective as a chemical engineer, as an engineer who deals with energy, I think that's one of the recipes.
Thank you, Yamil. Anybody else want to?
If I can add kind of along those lines, so two aspects, the medical system, when the hurricane came to Puerto Rico, my mom was in her 6 months of her recovery from a bone marrow transplant. So that was very hard, kind of trying to get in touch, appointments, kind of keep the treatment going. Things kind of halted. And it really hasn't gone back to the way it was. It's still many, many, many calls to get what you need from the same place that it used to happen like that. But still, I have a friend whose mom needs surgery since July last year. And through everything, it's now being postponed to September 24th this year. And it's pretty painful what she's going through. And she's going through this every day. But there's really no way for her to get this to work. And at the end of the day, people actually have to kind of pick up their papers and take them from one office to the other office, to the other office, to the other office. And not everyone can do that. Not everyone has the family to help them. The elderly are suffering quite a bit because of that. And then the electric system in Puerto Rico is very delicate. So even though we may be at almost 100%, this can collapse just like that. I mean, you can easily see, I went to the island in June. Some of the light posts, they're just kind of tilted, waiting. We are all hoping no hurricanes this season because all of these are just kind of waiting to come down. We were traveling the island and all of a sudden we hit this massive traffic. Nothing was moving. Our site started to move. It was just a huge line. This was in June. Huge line of cars that could not go anywhere because a high voltage cable had come down. So everything stops. So it's very delicate. It's, you may hear the number and get encouraged, which is encouraging because, it's better than nothing, but it's very delicate. And I think that's also something to remember, that this can, if another hurricane comes through, which we're, going through that season again, this can change very quickly.
Can I say, so something very quick also that I wanted to make the point is that even year after, like right now, most of the island have power and most of the island, have communication. You can see the effects in the sense that throughout the months after Maria, all waterborne diseases increase 100 times. All vector-borne diseases increase. There's more water, there's more mosquitoes on a tropical island. And to make things worse, I think the course touched this a little bit. There's a shortage of physicians. There's a shortage of nurses. The way that the healthcare system in Puerto Rico has been in the last few years is there's only very few places where all these healthcare systems are located. So people that are like in the mountains, people that are in the island municipalities, they have to go to only these places. And then now you have a very weakened, very system that's not working very well. All of a sudden you have this high demand, this high pressure on it. So it's not working well. Even 1 year after, like she said, people that are waiting to get intervention, they have to wait long. There's a lack of gloves, antibiotics, things that in here you give for granted. There's lacking over there. So you can imagine how big this effect was that a year after you still see that in the healthcare system.
And before the next person, I would just add, because I think it's very important to underscore, and this is one of the things we really try to promote in the teach out in the project, which is all about awareness and moving people to action. Let's not forget that these are citizens of the United States and have been since 1917. So not that every human life, it doesn't matter, but the point is that from our perspective, we think that this information campaign that we're trying to promote is very important. We need to keep that in mind as we're listening to this about the situation. Yeah, Marisel.
I think one of the points that became really evident during the course of the interviews we conducted in some remote poor areas in Adjuntas and then with Taller Salud in Loíza was the extreme poverty, as we saw Mr. Marisel mention in the clip, how Hurricane Maria really unveiled this extreme poverty of the island that had been it was there, kind of covered under this lush green blanket, right? The beauty of the place. And people talked about how many people are still without housing. All the people who were left homeless or who still have their houses but no roofs. If you fly over the island, you will see all the blue tarps. The people we interviewed in that organization who are helping those in the immediate area talked about their clients having an 80% denial by FEMA to repair their homes. And in some cases, when an entire roof has been gone, they've been able to get like $300 from FEMA. $300, doesn't get you anywhere. So the system is broken. And, they said, we worry about people's health, but you cannot be healthy if you don't have a house, if you don't have a roof, if you don't have a bed. And there are so many people like that right now, still.
And to add to the woes too, this is something that we heard a lot of. There have been a lot of people who've lost their homes and don't have deeds, or they inherited the land and they can't prove that they're the owners, and so they're not able to get the money from FEMA. So right. The problems are just so many and almost too many to count. Yeah. Did anybody else want to, Joyce? You have this?
Yeah, I would like to. I was kind of speak to that point, but kind of expanding a little bit on just general well-being of people. As an anthropologist, it's kind of this. From the bottom, just talking to the people, what are their immediate concerns and immediate needs and what keeps them up at night. And I would also add something that's been talked about, but it's not, I do think it's very pressing, but it's not getting the coverage that I think it deserves. It's mental health. And I think during my pilot field work that I was doing here this summer, I kept talking to people, and what kept coming up was, people are not talking to this because there's also this taboo, which is very cultural, and those that go to the psychologist are, and I don't mean to start saying things, but there is a taboo on maybe going to a psychologist, talking about mental health. It's so invisible, it's so pervasive. But I kept talking to people, and that's what kept coming up. That's what kept coming up again and again and again. People are not well. People are not happy. People are just even after all this time, are still locked up in their houses, and they're not even able to socialize, kind of going back to the social fabric itself, what it means to enjoy, walking around your neighborhood when you're still looking at debris, when you're still thinking about the things that you lost. And even suicide rates have increased dramatically in comparison to past years, and people that call the suicide hotline. So that's also something else that maybe is not getting the attention that maybe the economic crisis or Puerto Rico's political status is getting on media, but I do think it's something very close to what people, right? It's people's well-being, very much at the individual and at the personal level, and it is very pressing also. So
I'm actually glad that you brought that up, because I think if I were to list, kind of from the perspective more of somebody who knows Puerto Rico, feels very familiar with it, have kind of a spiritual and emotional connection, and also family with the island, that one thing that really has struck me since the storm is precisely that. I mean, the incredible psychological impact of the storm. Everybody we spoke to, everybody. I mean, people from the wealthiest to the poorest people spoke of fear, the fear of a coming storm. Children who are terrified when it starts to rain. But also the psychological impact of something so simple, not simple, but you might not think of the incredible destruction of nature, and how, somebody that lives on the mountainside who looks out one day and every single tree has been defoliated for as far as the eye can see. I mean, the intense psychological impact of that is really hard to measure. And from my own perspective, having been to Puerto Rico, countless times, even 6-7 months after the storm, the first time I was able to get back, it just, it brought me to tears. Just to see, even though the green had started to reappear, just everywhere you look, everything looks different. It's just really, really hard to comprehend. So I think what Joyce is saying, because that's also part of the psychological impact. If every time you look out the window, that beautiful landscape that you saw in front of you is gone, it's very hard to measure that type of damage to the psyche. I don't know, Harold, if you wanted to say something.
I'll be brief. I mean, when I think about pressing needs, and I guess what I think of are, I guess, perhaps indirectly related to the hurricane. They have great bearing on its effects, but they're indirectly related. And I think of the capacity at the community level for folks to organize and have a sense of agency. I think in some ways, when we reflect on the consequences of the hurricane, what it reveals is sort of the weakness of sort of the larger kind of enveloping institutions that have, at least since the post-war era, been used to organize both Puerto Rico's development and politics, and the way in which services are provided. And that is both in relationship to the federal government, but also at the state and municipal level. And while, yes, there has been a lot of stories about resilience, that isn't specific to the period after the hurricane, right? That there's always resilience. One of the pressing needs is creating this sort of organizational capacity. It's not that it's not there, but it should be more dense. And working there several years ago, I think that was one of the things that would always come up, how there's a certain sense in which the politics of the island and its administrative structure crowds out some of that degree of agency that's needed to manage some of these things.
Thank you. So I think we're going to just move on to another topic that's already been touched on to an extent when Marisel mentioned the deaths of 3 close family members. And as many of you know, on August 28th this year, just a few days ago, it was reported that Puerto Rico's government had requested an independent review by George Washington University, which found that Hurricane Maria killed an estimated 2,795 people in Puerto Rico. That's more than 46 times the original official death toll of 64. And the question I have for the panelists, and again, you can choose if you want to or not to answer the question, is why did it take the Puerto Rican government so long, first to ask for this study, and second to make this announcement? And of course, there's still a lot of controversy. It could have been more. It's very difficult to arrive at a number like this. Harold, it seems like you have a...
So I don't find that surprising. So when I was there working in an economic think tank, one of the things that happened while I was there, is that the Bureau of the Department of Labor stopped publishing the inflation rate for a whole year. They have a mandate to publish it every month. Was there any mechanism for enforcing them, for making them do that? No. You don't want to publish how many people have died? Good luck with that. I mean, that doesn't surprise me. And I don't know that other jurisdictions are different. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. I know people complain about the federal government. The federal government, if you are a quantitatively oriented researcher, is a dream in terms of transparency compared to, your ability to go and extract diamonds out of the coal mines that are government agencies when it comes to data. Some of this is related, however, and I should, in being fair, to the long sort of brewing financial crisis that has been afflicting the island for a long time. Many of the things that agencies do is cut, areas that are less urgent or less pressing when it comes to their charters or mandates. So, for example, the Government Development Bank, which ostensibly, is now broke. When your client is the Puerto Rico government, we know what's likely to happen. One of the things that it would cut was financial publications for its research division. It has no library. And the same was true for all kinds of agencies whose ostensible mission is the production of information. So, I would be surprised if that's not true of the Department of Health.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to... Joyce?
Yeah, just a note on I guess on time. The fact that as time kept passing, it got harder and harder. And I'm not saying this as any way to, but I'm just saying how difficult it is to determine direct and indirect deaths. And I do believe that this should be talked about more openly, but I think that there is kind of refusal to take responsibility for certain deaths that maybe happened a lot of time after the hurricane, right? And I think that this has to do with, and this is mainly this is me thinking. I'm just what I believe, but maybe there is some role of the present administration that didn't want to actually take responsibility for deaths that had to do with kind of crises that were most social and political in nature. For example, if we're talking about a crumbling health system, that maybe meant that a few months after the hurricane, someone passed away because some resources were not available for them, right? So I think that there is also a refusal to acknowledge those events as related to the hurricane, because I think it speaks to other things that are more social and political in nature, and people can kind of say, no, all this time has passed, so it's not really related. So where people draw the line is also very subjective and political, I think. And I think that also comes in. This idea of competency and who's responsible is also something that people don't want to talk about, I think. But that's just an opinion.
When we spoke to people, when we were conducting the interviews, pretty much everyone mentioned how what was at the time the official Puerto Rican government's number, 64 deaths related to the hurricane, was incorrect, because people know many people who died or stories of people they know. So nothing really made sense. So Puerto Ricans are not really surprised by this number. As a matter of fact, it's likely that it's even higher than that. And some of the people we spoke to, for instance, Laura Moscoso, who works for the Centro de Periodismo Investigativo, she, in her mind, this was simply a failure of the Puerto Rican government to be transparent, with the people, and that it was maybe perhaps an issue of pride, because the government has received so many accolades for having dealt from the U.S. government, for having dealt with the crisis in such a effective way, right? So we don't really know where, but the fact is that they refused to allow for investigation. There were people who were trying to dig deeper and trying to find the truth behind what had happened, and it really took a long time for this to be acknowledged. And this is the truth that everyone knew was already there.
Can I say something? So Marisel just remind me, everybody, I don't know if you guys remember that infamous visit of President Trump to the island. He actually congratulated Governor Rosselló because there were only 16 deaths. So I think that for the government, they didn't want to acknowledge those studies because they wanted to make the perception that it was so effective that there were only 16 deaths at the time. And this study that you mentioned is only the latest. There have been like 4 or 5, and they all have same. Some of them have said that's even higher. Like the Harvard one was like 4,000 once. So 4,000. 4
or 5.
4 or 5,000.
No, 4,500, close to it. Yeah.
Anybody else want to?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Nydia, yeah, go ahead. You were.
I just wanted to say, this is more at the level of the towns and the specific towns, and going back to organization and how the system works, and how information there's not a system in place that can easily allow for information to be shared between offices, between hospitals, between different organizations on the island. And if you wanted to do that work, then if you don't have the resources or you're not given the permissions, then you're blocked from doing that. So I think, going at that level, it gets compounded by the fact that, you don't necessarily know how to report it. My mother-in-law passed away a few days after the hurricane. We don't think it was related to the hurricane because of her condition, but what followed, how to get her moved away from there, that was just a whole ordeal on its own. And to the point where it's like, nobody knew what you should do. So when the information's not there, then trying to figure out how to sort all of these out it can also delay the process of giving people a realistic view of what the people in the island were going through.
No, I want to agree, right? I think that one of the themes that has come up is, that there's also political reasons for why the official count was kept low for so long, right? And I think in part, that's the local government and the Puerto Rico government, and also, the relationship that Puerto Rico has to the United States. From that political point of view, that also plays a very big role that I don't think a lot of, that's not being necessarily talked about or taken into account when we say, oh, why did the Puerto Rico government, say it was only 64 deaths, and then you need outside entities to come in and actually count the death for you. There's a part missing there, in my opinion, and I think it's the relationship between the United States and Puerto Rico and how that plays out on the national media, the current administration, both in Puerto Rico and the United States.
Thank you. Keeping an eye on time and realizing that many of you have other things to do after this, and I want to give the audience time in a minute to ask some questions to the panelists. I do just have maybe one or two quick questions and ask that maybe just a couple of you answer. And the first one would be, part of another one of our aims in this online course that we've offered, and also just in kind of putting the video interviews online, is to project this importance of changing the narrative, so to speak. There's been so much, and people kind of suffer even sometimes from what you might call disaster fatigue, where there's so much negative news. The increased death toll, the intensified financial woes. Puerto Rico was already in the midst of a major debt crisis when Hurricane Maria hit, and this notion is, how is the island ever going to recover? In almost every way. But one thing that Marisel and I were so impressed by throughout the whole process of doing these interviews was all the positive stories that came through. The sense of resilience. And Harold, you mentioned it, this isn't something that was born with Hurricane Maria. It's almost part of the national fabric, right? This is an island with an intense cultural pride. People rely very heavily on family, on friends, on religion. This is a place where, happiness is not necessarily measured by financial well-being. But I guess I would like to ask the panelists, do you have any concrete examples of anything positive that's come out of this storm? Because, the negative narrative is true, but it's also can be, really exhausting and overwhelming. So I don't know if anybody wants to make any comments. What positive things have come from this?
I think the one positive is that Puerto Rico is now part of the national conversation, right? And people are starting to wonder, why did this happen to Puerto Rico? These are American citizens. What's Puerto Rico? Aren't they a state? What's a territorial? What does that mean? The Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Well, Massachusetts is a Commonwealth. Right? How does that, right? How does that translate? And people are starting to ask these questions, and Puerto Rico is now becoming part of the national conversation. And I think we need to ride that momentum to actually then push Congress and Congress people to make that a part of the conversation. Look, what are you going to do about Puerto Rico? Why did this happen? What systems are we going to put in place so that the next September, the next hurricane, these things do not happen? If a disaster does happen, what are we going to do so that our response is a lot better, it's a lot quicker, right? So making Puerto Rico part of the national conversation in that sense, and pushing Congress to come up answers to these very difficult questions, but that's their job. Right? So push them to do their job for the American citizen in Puerto Rico to answer these questions, is to take a position.
Yeah. And I would just add, but I want to give the panelists a chance, but even the fact that at a Notre Dame football weekend, we're about to play Michigan tomorrow, that we were able to get a crowd this big on a Friday afternoon. This is actually a really good crowd for an event like this. And I think, this is part of why, like you're saying, getting Puerto Rico to be part of the national conversation, and this is, really a positive sign. I don't know, does anybody else want to add to that? Yeah, Joyce. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Joyce, and then Harold. Yeah.
Just a few points, and I don't want to. I had like 3 points, but never mind. I think one of them I would say at the level of the island itself. I think a lot of people would take for granted, kind of like some of you said, it's like, oh, we're gonna be fine. We've been through other hurricanes before, and there was this taken for grantedness that I think has, in a way, vanished, for better or for worse, because we were talking about the psychological toll as well. But I think that now there's just more awareness of we need to be prepared. So that, in a way, might mean that for the next disaster, it might not everyone completely unaware. Kind of a second point, and we've already talked about it a little bit, but the fact that the hurricane, there was this smoke screen, I think, of prosperity, and everyone's fine, everyone's middle class, everyone's this smoke screen that actually came down and was completely dissipated after the hurricane, in which it was evident that there was extreme poverty, that there were some people that recovered faster than others. There's people that still haven't recovered, right? So the fact that those things, they're not positive, but the fact that they're part of the conversation as well, I think is a good thing that came out of this. And I think one last one would be the fact that because everything was so dire and because a lot of people had they just had to do something. So I think a lot of people also realized that sometimes, a lot of people actually realized, hey, we can do some things together. And we can come together, and there are so many, against all odds, there are so many restrictions and so many things that are, in a way, kind of holding us back in a way, preventing us from succeeding, but we actually got together and built the bridge, or we got together and crossed the, So that is a tiny speck of positive amid all this negativity.
And this is a narrative I think that weaves together a lot of the interviews that we did. This idea that communities have come together, and many people told us, look, the government wasn't helping, not the local, the town government, not the Puerto Rican government, not the U.S. government, so we banded together and we fixed things. So I think that's, I have to agree with that. Harold, yeah?
I was going to say one tentative positive, I'm not totally convinced of this, is that in a way the added pressure both externally and internally for adopting solutions is greater. So it's important to remember that the economic and fiscal crisis afflicting Puerto Rico precedes the hurricane by a significant number of years. In fact, one could date the initial contraction of Puerto Rico's economy to 2006 when there was a government shutdown. And Puerto Rico really never really recovered from that and the Great Recession. So the hurricane sort of hits Puerto Rico at a pretty low point. During that time period, there are ideas, there are potential solutions out there. They've never really been put into practice. And one argument is that the degrees of freedom have increasingly closed. For reasons that are perhaps too complicated to go into right now. There's just never been a clear adoption of a path forward. And that actually makes this crisis, people tend to forget that there have been others, different than preceding crises that Puerto Rico has been afflicted by, of a similar, perhaps not a similar magnitude, but of a similar nature, like macroeconomic contraction, fiscal crisis, etc. So that's one tentative positive. A perverse positive is that after the hurricane, many of the bond holding companies, bond trading companies actually gave up on collecting on their debt. So they dumped a lot of the debt. So now other creditors might be more willing to negotiate a haircut more steeply, and therefore, even though they would collect a profit, and that would actually relieve some of the pressures on the Puerto Rico government. That's kind of a positive if you are the one paying the debt. So anyway.
It can certainly be seen that way. Anybody else before we kind of turn it over to the audience, because I'm sure people here have questions. Anybody else? I think this is probably a good time to do that because we've addressed some of the really important pressing issues, and yeah, I think we'll give if anybody in the audience, yeah, Eleanor, please.
In your video, I didn't see any interviews with children or people talking about children, and I guess because we have children and most of our friends in Puerto Rico who were affected, the big thing was no school and no technology, which was not all a bad thing, that thing is learning. But I just wonder, because you think about disruption over generations and how that plays out, and I wondered if from the project or from the panelists, somebody could give some insight into how children and families are affected and how that might play out over generations.
I would just really quickly, because of you asked about the interviews, we did not interview any children. Part of it is because we wanted to be sure that we got permission to show it, and I think we made a conscious decision But a lot of people did talk about their children and how they've been impacted by the lack of school and how many of them were weeks, some months without school. And they go back to the school and there was no electricity, no air conditioning. So the psychological impact on the children is profound. And I would be very surprised if this generation of young people in Puerto Rico isn't marked for a very long time by what they experienced. I don't know if anybody else, I don't have much more to say on that.
Sorry, I don't mean to.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Just talking a little bit about the communities that I work with, and I mean, if I say just a little bit of context, I'm probably gonna stereotype. So I'm just gonna try to keep it their communities, their working class communities, right in the middle of San Juan, and the island, because of the economic crisis and everything that we're talking about, is actually, and this is something that had started before, but there are a lot of schools closing down. And talking to a lot of people in the communities, they framed this as even a bigger disaster than the hurricane itself. And they're kind of like, the hurricane only made things worse, but for us, we've been living in conditions of political and even natural disaster as well, but I won't go into that. There's a lot of contamination and everything. But we've been living this social and political disaster for years now, kind of like how you were saying. This started 2006, and I would say even before, right? It's very much ingrained in the history of Puerto Rico, I would say, and colonial, and its colonial nature. But that's something that kept coming up again and again. The fact that in these communities, 5 schools were closed, and these are very small communities right in the middle of San Juan. 5 schools is a lot. So a lot of people frame that as not only a part of this disaster, but even a bigger amount of the disaster itself. So, yeah.
And across the island, hundreds of schools have closed.
Yes, that's not only San Juan.
Another disaster in the making, really.
Yeah.
On a go-forward basis, I've been thinking that the concern is the skilled, educated workforce accelerating, leaving the island and coming here. And go forward, that seems to me to be the greatest risk. And I don't know what, if anything, can be done to prevent that, but if you lose all these educated, bright, energetic people, the investment also slows down, and then the ball rolls down the hill very quickly. How do you deal with losing? What percentage of the population is left since Maria?
150,000 people.
I think the latest numbers are close to 170,000 since the hurricane, and that doesn't take into account the mass migration that was already happening because of the economic crisis, the preceding exodus. So, I mean, you're correct. There's a lot we're losing on the island. There's been a great loss of, intellectual people who are prepared, etc. Something needs to be done to attract young Puerto Ricans to come back and to stay, right?
Keep rolling down, but she has an island full of people my age, who are not working and not producing and so forth.
Right, so giving incentives, etc. I don't know, I mean, I guess we can have a long conversation about this. There's no easy answers. But
I would say along those lines, there's a lot of people are actually choosing to stay and work really hard and get things moving. So supporting those people that are actually gonna keep that in Puerto Rico to help the people of Puerto Rico is kind of a main focus, not an opportunistic company or business that's just trying to kind of make a buck and get a nice piece of land or something like that. There's a lot of people are willing to stick it out and that are doing a lot of good work. My mom's doctor refuses to leave the island, and he's one of the ones that just does I think the one that does bone marrow transplants in the island. So it's like, he's like, I'm here, I'm staying, but then give him everything he needs because he's willing to help and he's willing to stay. So
before people leave,
How many undergraduate students do we have in the audience? Can you?
How many undergraduate students from total undergraduate students in Notre Dame or Puerto Rican?
From Puerto Rico.
From Puerto Rico. How many?
1, 2,
3.
3.
Thank you. Welcome, all of you. Thank you. That was your question. You got your answer. I wish more of you were here. Spread the word, please. I mean, this is actually a course. This is something that Marisel and I have 4. Oh, you have a question. Just that Marisel and I have really tried to promote this notion too, that even people that know a lot about Puerto Rico can get something out of this
absolutely.
course. This is not just for people that know nothing about Puerto Rico, by any means. Yeah. By any means. There are parts of the course that you'll maybe giggle at, be like Puerto Rico 101, which is a 20-minute video segment that we try to condense the entire history of the island from the pre-colonial period to 2018 in 20 minutes. And we did it with the help of a professor at the University of Michigan. 20 minutes of video. I encourage all of you to watch it. For the Puerto Ricans here, you may actually learn something about your island. Yes?
So, one of the questions I had, you were talking about how Puerto Rico is now coming to the national discussion. And one of the things that some local candidates are talking about, and there's more of a discussion on statehood. And my question is, especially those on the island, I know it's always been a 50-50 issue, do people think, or is there a growing support more for the topic of statehood, that statehood would have, if Puerto Rico was a state, this thing wouldn't have gotten as bad as it did, and the economic situation may have, so kind of what is that now post-Moreno, the thoughts of those on the island on statehood?
That's a big question. I don't know about Puerto Ricans answer.
So I don't know about post.
I have a really long answer for that one.
I don't know about post-Maria if the sentiment has changed, but the vast majority of Puerto Ricans favor some sort of relationship with the United States. Whether that be the current status or statehood. I think and I don't think that would have changed with the hurricane. Maybe it did, but I don't think it did. I think the important thing to remember when we're talking about Puerto Rico's status is that Puerto Rico can't do anything by themselves. Mm-hmm. Congress needs to dictate what happens to Puerto Rico. Right? There's been multiple referendums and plebiscites in Puerto Rico that have said we want statehood or we want to stay the same or so on, and nothing happens. And the reason nothing happens is because Congress is the one that needs to dictate, right? Legally, right? We are a part of the United States. Congress is the one that needs to decide what happens. And so that's where the pressure needs to be, in my opinion. It's like, look, give Puerto Ricans an actual choice, right? Make a referendum that is sanctioned by the U.S. Congress and that is going to be binding, and lay out what the terms are going to be so that Puerto Ricans can make an informed decision as to what their relationship and what their face is to the international community. So until that happens, there's nothing we can do.
Yeah, and then about your question that you're asking that if Puerto Rico was a state, would the response would have been different? I argue that it probably wasn't going to be different because I remember for Katrina, there was controversy too, and Katrina's right here in the mainland. I think the problem was that if you compare with other disasters that happened in the mainland, news outlets are there, and the whole U.S. society can see on the go what's happening. With Puerto Rico, there was this like black box, like nobody knew what was happening. So I think that even if it were a state, I think there was going to be some delay there just because of the perception that nothing was happening.
If I may, I mean, I don't want to turn this into a political discussion, but we just saw that Hawaii was just almost hit by a major hurricane, several days ago, and I felt like that was constantly in the news. It was nonstop in the news, every detail, where it was, how strong the winds were, how much rain was going to fall, and that's not the way that the situation in Puerto Rico was treated. So I would kind of be the devil's advocate and say, if Puerto Rico had been a state, I think the response might have been different. But also you have all sorts of other issues that come into this. I mean, the fact that it's a Spanish-speaking island, for example. I mean, it's probably better not to go there right now, but it's such a loaded question. And it's really, really difficult to know. But I agree with you to an extent. The whole Hawaii thing really opened my eyes to Hawaii is a very isolated place, much more isolated than Puerto Rico, for example. And very similar geographical, similar complicated, and so, you just never know. Thank God it wasn't hit as hard as it could have been. Thank God. Yeah.
Well, just a quick note on that, and I don't know how much if that's a big rabbit hole, but I think, and I'm just thinking of this vignette, just looking at this, what's the spaghetti chart, usually when they kind of track all the possible trajectories that a hurricane could take, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you
Spaghetti
go this
chart.
way, right? And then I remember this kind of excerpt looking like, oh, it's looking good for us. When all the trails just were passing completely by Puerto Rico. So what us means, right? So I think at the very core of it, it's like what America means for a lot of people and whether Puerto Rico's in there or not, right? Because in this case, it looks good for us. Evidently, we did not include the island of Puerto Rico, and it's 3.7 million American residents, right? American citizens. So I think that's also at the very core, which is why it's a great question and it's so complicated, because it's not just about statehood and what Puerto Rico wants, it's also about what America thinks America is, right?
Or what Americans think of the people and the places in the Caribbean. I remember 2 news reports of Irma and Maria, and there was one that I kept, I recorded and saw it 100 times, where a weatherman on the Weather Channel said, thank God it slammed the northern coast of Cuba because it saved us from this or that. And I just thought, what a weird way to put it. I mean, the entire northern coast of Cuba was just decimated by Hurricane Irma. And it's just part of that accepted narrative that, well, there are Spanish-speaking people in the Caribbean and they don't matter as much. So there is a little bit of that comes, whether people here think or not, but certainly in the news media that comes across quite a bit, I think. Yeah.
You inquired some good things that came out of this. I sense a sense of awareness and concern about others. Having experienced Maria, Category 5 hurricane, when it was announced that Hawaii was going to receive Category 5 winds, which then dissolved to a tropical storm.
And mostly rain.
The amount of awareness, of concern in Puerto Rico, prayers for the people of Hawaii, knowing what we have gone through and they were going to be exposed to, was a sense of awareness which a year ago was lacking from our society. So in a sense, that was something positive that came out of it.
That's very interesting.
And hopefully we'll be praying for other people in the future who will be exposed to something similar.
Thank you.
Yeah, sort of a 2-part question. One is, like, I'm sure everybody here kind of would be curious as to your thoughts on like what we can do, those of us who are here, and more specifically, what you guys think of tourism as like a thing we can do. I was in Puerto Rico this weekend actually, and I have been there 6 weeks after Maria for work. I'm a journalist. So being back, I was like, this is great. I'm really enjoying getting to see it in tourist capacity, but it also felt kind of weird to me to be like in my native community in Ocean Park and watching like bachelor parties and Old San Juan. I was like, this feels a little weird at the same time that I feel like I'm hopefully doing the right thing by like spending money in local businesses and stuff. So I'm curious what your thoughts would be on those 2 questions. What can we do, and is tourism universally a good answer to that question?
I'm gonna say that, taking the tourism question, I think at this point, not immediately after the hurricane, that was really difficult. There were too many obstacles for that. And I don't think it just wasn't safe. Even when we went there end of March, most of the stoplights were still not working. But at this point, I do encourage people to travel there. And, Puerto Rico tourism is one of the most important, economic channels, drivers, whatever you want to call, and I think the island can use that. As part of the Teach Out, we have curated a list, a very short list, but we have other organizations in mind that hopefully we can expand the list of organizations that are doing work on the island. many that we interviewed or contacted, have contacts with. So these are nonprofit organizations, doing all of this amazing work. And so we invite the audience to just adopt an organization, see where your interests lie, and if one of them connects with that, and learn more about it, and see what kind of projects they're working on. And if you happen to travel and can connect with them, that would be awesome. Or if you just want to send some money to them, that's great. I'm sure it can help. So I think that's a really good way, a concrete way, And again, it's not an exhaustive list. There are many grassroots organizations doing amazing work right now, really important work that we need to help fund so that people actually can stay, on the island. So anyway, that would be my thought on that.
Anybody else want to answer that? We have just a few more minutes probably before we should wrap it up.
And I think a very, very easy thing that we can all do is that just promote this teach-out. I mean, social media nowadays is such a powerful tool to change people's perceptions and people's ideas. And just something very easy, just promote this teach-out in the hope that it will reach the ears or the eyes of the people in Congress or people in power and change their perceptions, their attitudes. I think that nowadays social media can influence things like elections. So it's a very powerful thing. So that's something very easy, just to promote, these types of teach-outs, these courses, this type of things will really help.
And I would add, of course, self-interest aside, that promoting the teach-out too, one of the unique things about a project like this, this is a teach-out that's been endorsed by 2 presidents of 2 top 20 universities in the United States, people with a great amount of credibility, institutions with long histories, with very strong missions. So I really just think, promote any type of learning about Puerto Rico, because everybody knows that education is really power, and the more people know, and the more people get their information from legitimate channels, the better. So I would just.
And I would add, contact your Congress people, right? We have midterm elections coming up. Wouldn't it be wonderful if watching those debates, the question of Puerto Rico comes up, right? So contact your Congress people, write letters, call, make Puerto Rico an issue, right, that you're going to vote on, and let your Congress people know that, right? That's how, especially in the Puerto Ricans in the diaspora, that's how we get power, right? Let's make Puerto Rico part of the conversation. Let's make it an issue so that these midterm elections, they have to answer that question.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think we have time maybe for one more question. Yeah.
Just a question to her question of tourism and having fun while people maybe. I think back in the island, everyone's trying to have a normal life, so don't feel bad. It's amongst the mess or whatever, people are getting married, children are being born, we go on with our lives. So you shouldn't feel bad. It's great, and people come over and we have new businesses and we have new things going on, and maybe that brings a sense of normality also for everyone else. So it's fine.
And we would go there.
Sure, a lot of us are having fun, and we're trying to get back to normal. So
and lots of tourists is normal, right? So the people come, and I think that kind of.
And don't think that everyone, you're going to go and talk to everybody, and we're all just crying and
absolutely.
We're back to normal, and we're having fun, and we're, our lives go on, and trying to help each other, and a lot of the NGOs. A lot of them suffered a lot, and they lost, just like any business, they lost everything that they had. And some of them have disappeared, others have joined efforts, and they're working together and trying to make things better for everyone else. And a lot of them also have evolved into something bigger than what they were before, just because they found other needs that they had to fill from things that have other organizations that have disappeared, or maybe the government didn't do, couldn't get to some people at the time, and so all these NGOs started working together to help out. So there's a lot to be done, a lot that you can get involved with. So
Thank you. I think that's a very important observation. Did anybody want to kind of have some closing comments about this, just...
Well, this is going to sound funny, but I just wanted to make the point that, that in Hollywood films, there's always this idea that in order to build, you have to destroy. So I think this is a great opportunity to come out better than before. So rebuilding, but, do something better. So you don't have to be, people say will Puerto Rico will be like as it was before? So I argue that it should not, it should be better. It should take this opportunity to be better. And a concrete example, I can say, is that many people are going solar. They're investing now in clear energy. And Puerto Rico is privileged that it's near the equator, in the middle of the ocean. There's plenty of sun. There's plenty of wind too. So these are opportunities that if they get the support of the government, they can really make a difference. Sadly, they're lacking that, but I think this is an opportunity that to grow and rebuild and come out better at the end.
Yes. Yeah, one more. I was going to say I can hardly think of a better way to end, but
I just want to ask a question.
Yeah.
Regarding the teach-out, how much of it is a little bit going to your point, and it's leadership. So at the end of the day, what's lacking in Puerto Rico is true leadership.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why we're having all these issues throughout the last 14, 20 years is complete lack of leadership. The center in values, common values, and everything gets clouded with the status, the political status. But at the end of the day, that's the way for politicians to keep their jobs. To talk about the superficial and not deal with the real issue, which is leadership at the public sector and at the private sector. Myself coming from the private sector, it's very hard to exert leadership because the biggest client for the private sector is the government. And it's been like that for 100 years. So when you look at the island's challenges today, they stem from the same core problem, which is lack of leadership since 1964, where the leader who actually got what we got died or retired or whatever. So I'm curious to know, as I listen, how much of your teach out has to do with leadership, because there's a lot to be gained in Puerto Rico by having the effective leadership.
It's a great question. I think maybe Marisel, you might start with a couple words I can say about it too.
Yeah, I'll answer quickly. I think we have subdivided the teach out in different topics like infrastructure and environment. I'm forgetting.
Culture, economics,
migration, etc. You will not find a section on leadership. However, interestingly enough, in the interviews that we conducted with people, with grassroots organizations, it became very evident that there are amazing leaders in the communities.
Absolutely.
So the talent is not lacking, is that they stay at the community level, and these people are not necessarily going up for government jobs, etc. But there is an incredible amount of talent and energy that, to me, that was one of the most surprising and eye-opening things that I experienced through this. So the leaders are there. It's just that maybe the system doesn't want to see them.
Yeah.
And if there is more collaboration from top down, I think you'll find that a lot of transformation can take place.
Absolutely.
Because there's a lot of talent.
I would just add that, I agree completely with Marisel, and it was actually really impressive. I just over and over was so impressed from people from the very lowest to the very highest. I mean, because we did interview people who are known leaders in Puerto Rico. World-renowned authors like Mayra Santos, Alexis Masol at Casa Pueblo, who's become almost an international superstar with this, this energy revolution that he's unleashing in Adjuntas. At the same time, there were people, young people who had lost, a young couple who had lost the yogurt business that was flourishing, and instead of, crying and hanging their head and, throwing in the towel, these people went in to look for what community organization can we get involved in, and how can we help as other communities, lift up. And so I felt like, these are the kind of people that will be the future leaders, or should be the future leaders of Puerto Rico. So many people we talked to, I just thought, man, this person needs to get to the right place, because there are a lot of people there that wanna lead. But I agree with you, because this has been a major problem. So, looking as an outsider, but also somewhat of an insider. So thank you for that question. I think it's very important. And this teach out isn't necessarily done. I mean, we have future plans perhaps with it too, and maybe some little segment on leadership might not be a bad idea.
Yeah.
More specifically, because I think it's a really important topic.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, with that, I think we should give our round of applause to our panelists. Thank you so much to all of you for coming. I'm really, I feel really strongly that this was such a nice experience, and to see on a football afternoon this many people, and so few people got up and left. I go to so many of these events on campus, and 20 minutes into it, everybody kind of starts filing out, and I was really happy to see everybody stay, because I think this is a very engaging conversation, and that was really one of the major points here.
You want to say something about the reception?
Yes, yeah. Maybe Elliot should, because I think you have more details about the reception.
Yeah. So we have a reception starting right now in the Martin Media Center, which is on the east side of the stadium in the first floor of Corbett Hall. And the reason we're going all the way over there is that we also have an open studio. So for any of you who would like to contribute your stories, tell your stories about your experience in Puerto Rico, we have a live camera, and so you're invited to come and record your story and so on. So, and also see the Martin Media Center. So you're all invited. It's a little walk. You go around the stadium to the east side on the first floor. And love to see all of you there. So thanks again to the panelists, and Tom, Marisel, Bill, and Sonia, and everybody who's come here. Say again?
Door 3?
It's on the north door. Door number 3.
Three.
Yes, behind door number 3 is a prize. It's called happy hour.